Welcome to tonight's session on First Careers for Students of Color. The topic tonight is race, ethnicity, and workplace culture. My name is Steve Hairston. I'm the Assistant Director for Employer Engagement in the Malone Center at Furman University. And I am honored tonight to have four distinguished Furman alums discussing this very important topic with the Furman community. We have from Duke University, Dr. Johnna Frierson, who is an assistant professor. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. She is a class of '05. Giovanna Gomez-Collins, who is a social work clinician in Charlotte, North Carolina, also class of '05. Thank you for joining us, Giovanna. Joey Malamug from ScanSource. He is a recruiting manager there, class of '02. Thank you, Joey, for participating. And last but definitely not least, Mr. John Ferguson with Monumental Sports in Washington, D.C. He's the vice president of people and culture there with the organization, class of '09, correct? Correct. So thank you for participating this evening. What I'm going to do in the chat is, as we get started, I will attach I will attach a bio for all of the panelists so that you are able to look through the bio and read up a little bit more on their backgrounds and education, and have a little bit of information about them. I also sent that out earlier via email. And then as we go through the evening, please feel free, if you do have any questions that you would like to ask of the panelists at any time, there's a question and answer feature there as part of the session. The panelists will not be able to see the participants, but of course the participants can see the panelists. And to start things off, I am going to launch a poll. I would love for people who are participating this night in the audience to please fill out this poll to tell us what your year is at Furman and what your affiliation with the institution may be. So we'll take a few minutes to do that. All right, I'll end the poll here. And we have a couple of staff members, and then we have a first-year student who is also participating. We will be recording this for other participants who could not, or for people within the Furman community who could not join us this evening. So I'll definitely make that available. To start things off, I have some questions that I have already created for the panelists, and they are aware of these questions. And so I just kind of want to get started with this first question. Is for Dr. Frierson. Dr. Frierson, you know, as a person of color, we often have different experiences than people who are white or of the majority. And this is very, very true, probably in the workplace. How, you know, and just in general, and maybe from even your own personal experience, how do you think people of color experience the workplace differently than white professionals?
Thank you. So I think one of the best ways I can distill it down is into how you are oriented or included into the workplace. So many times as a person of color, you're often not going to be part of the majority. You're going to be one of few. And I can say that especially from my background being in the sciences. oftentimes, and one of only, and even in my position now as assistant dean, there's not very many people of color in leadership positions at my level. And so what that means is that there's always things that are apparent and open about cultural norms in a workplace, or the social norms in a workplace. There's also always things that are hidden. And so I think when you're part of a majority group, you have a lot easier access to those hidden, maybe implicit ways that people interact with each other, or knowledge that might not be as accessible to everyone else. So I would say that that's one of the biggest things is being able to understand the dynamics of your workplace relationships, the structures, and things like that can possibly impact your ability to be successful.
Thank you very much for that. Do you think that, take the question just a little bit step further, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here. How is this maybe different for, or is this different for people who identify within different ethnicities or different races, in the context of the work environment? May this be different for me as an African American, but yet even completely different for someone who maybe identifies as Hispanic or Asian, maybe even a person who identifies a different religion or gender identification. Can it sometimes differ within those contexts as well?
I would definitely say yes. And not only that, I think it's even more complex when you think about the intersection of other identities. So gender, sexual orientation, that other parts of our background, our personal background that impact the people that we are and the person that we bring into the workspace. So I would definitely say that it has an impact. And on top of that, the stereotypes and the generalizations or perceptions that people might have of a particular identity or group that you belong to are also going to be different. So in some spaces, in some sectors, your identity might be seen as a benefit. Whereas in a different sector, that same identity can have a perception of, or can have a negative perception. So it definitely depends on the context. And there are certain even educational disciplines or academic disciplines where there's an expectation that certain groups, whether it be based on gender or race and ethnicity, that you're going to excel or you're automatically seen as the model minority. So that exists as well. So it's definitely dependent on how they perceive a particular aspect of your identity.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Ferguson, kind of segueing off of that question, you're the vice president of an organization. You're at a very high level and able to see sort of the big picture of your culture within your organization. Why is race, ethnicity, culture, why is diversity important for an organization, for a company? What's really true? What's truly in it for them to care about this particular topic?
The truth for them is let's just talk about, we're in a capitalist society, so we want to hit that bottom line. So there's tons of data that shows and supports that homogeneous teams are outperformed by diverse teams. Some quick stats that I have up here: diverse companies enjoy 2.3 times higher cash flows per employee. Diverse management boosts revenue by 19%. 43% of companies with diverse boards notice higher profits. So the data is there to show that the more diversity you have and the more inclusion you have, the greater the returns will be. We also know that we've seen large or major brands have what we would call foot and mouth type moments. I think of H&M, where they had the little, it was a little black boy with the coolest monkey in the jungle shirt. It makes me question who was around that table. who in that series of branding and approval did not note that, hey, something's off here, or hey, this is how I experience this. But I also think one of the things that we have to keep in mind there is that, yes, diversity is important, but inclusion is also important, because I need to make sure that those diverse voices feel comfortable speaking up in that room at that table, and don't necessarily feel what I would call the microaggressions of, hey, you're here, thank you. And that's just kind of where it is. Thank you. Oh, you have an opinion. Great. Thank you. And it just ends. They're not seeing you as a value add to the organization. So that's where a lot of companies are missing the mark. It's the inclusion piece. So if I break this down to the science of the brain, essentially it all boils down to, are you insider or are you an outsider? So you have your ancient brain, you have your modern brain. Your ancient brain is lazy. It is the one that you default to the general stereotype. So I see Steve, I may envision him in a hoodie. I may envision him with an Arizona iced tea and a bag of Skittles. I'm paralleling him to Trayvon Martin. So that may be the image. Or I have Ahmaud Arbery, but I'm seeing him and I sense this threat. What we need to do is slow down that ancient brain and leverage our modern brain. Our modern brain allows us to reason, to think more critical and not put people in buckets. Also with that, we as human beings, we are not designed, question here, who on the panel is good at multitasking? Okay,
raise my hand.
We think we're good at multitasking, but we're just switching from one task to the other. We can't do two things at one time. Same thing with the brain. So when I tie this back into inclusion, I come into ScanSource and I'm working for Joey. First couple months have been going well, but then things start to shift for me. And now I am experiencing microaggressions. I feel like I'm being left off meeting invites. And I know that I have a part of this project. Now my brain is going to a space of I want to stop the pain, because that our bodies internalize that as pain. Everybody wants to be an insider. So when I am an outsider, I'm trying to figure out, how do I navigate to become an insider? So my body is now experiencing a level of trauma because it wants to stop the feeling of me feeling like an outsider. That is then prohibiting me from bringing my full self to that workplace, because I'm stressed, I'm having anxiety. So there's many ways in which the return on investment show up. Sometimes for the diversity and inclusion space, it's hard to measure because it's the implicit things that Johnna referenced. And so it can be interesting, but I challenge us all. The good example that I heard shared was, the insiders, outsiders, ancient brain versus modern brain. All of that means that we need to extend grace to people. And so, say for instance, Wofford is Furman's, I would think one of our rivals. So I'm going down the highway. I get cut off by Steve. He has his Furman tag. I'm like, hey, it was a mistake. He didn't see me. Say, hey, Steve, how's it going? The Wofford person cuts me off. That person, they did it deliberately. I know they cut me off in traffic. Ancient brain, modern brain. We have to slow down and say, we don't know what that Wofford person was doing, but we have to extend that same grace that we would have to a Furman alumni. And the same thing when it comes to in the workplace. We need to make sure that we are doing our role, all of us, to make sure that people feel like insiders. So if you see that person sitting on the fringe of the room, sitting on the fringe of the conversation, or not speaking up, and, when I think about the areas in which I have privilege, my gender is one in which I carry privilege. I did this exercise once. It was called a diversity pedal. And on each piece of this pedal, it had essentially protected classes. And, I go around this pedal and, you typically identify with your most dominant marginalized group. So for me, I am Black before I am anything else. But when I went around that pedal, my race was my only non-dominant category. But I also need to make sure that I recognize, in being the only man on my team, that I need to make sure that I'm creating space for my colleagues. Make sure that me as an extrovert, that I leave room for others to join the conversation. Or I say to them, hey, what are your thoughts here? We'd love to hear your insight. So sort of pull and tease that out. So the return is there. Companies need to do it. I think the hard part is the inclusion, because you can attract the diversity, but does the diversity feel like an insider or an outsider? If they feel like an outsider, they start to experience this pain. You are now losing some of the productivity that you could get from this star player, because you're undervaluing them in that process. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to leave your organization. And anytime we onboard someone and we invest in them, that is an investment. So you're expecting that return. But if they leave before that sort of dream is fulfilled for both parties, then you're missing out on the opportunity to grow revenue. So the data is there, hands down. And it's one of the diversity and inclusion space is always peculiar to me because the data shows the outcome and the benefit, but so many companies are struggling to activate in the space. I recently did a book club discussion on how to be an anti-racist. And the book really hit home because it talks about this is a journey for everyone. And it's either you're racist or anti-racist. So we really have to think about that. And that really is a call to action because I can't be a passive bystander. And racism in many ways is steeped in denial. So we have to make sure that we aren't first denying something that is a reality. And I think that is the intersection that people struggle with. The majority are not always comfortable with acknowledging just where we are and how we got here. Racism is a byproduct of just self-interest. So companies have to say, how can I put someone else's interest potentially ahead of other things that I'm concerned about or we as an organization concerned about to move everyone forward collectively.
Those are great insights because I don't think we don't tend to think of all of the important factors that go into why culture, why race and ethnicity is important in the workplace. And you hit on some really key some key pieces there. We live in a capitalistic society, but at the same time, we sometimes aren't wired, in a certain way to just naturally think about someone else's, racial identity, ethnic identity. We're so sort of ingrained in our culture that we just kind of operate with blinders on and we just sort of head down the path and not think about others around us.
I always say, stay curious.
Yeah, very much stay curious. And I think that's typical of what Furman students do. They're very curious individuals. It's one of the reasons why you seek out an education at Furman. I think that's a good segue into my next question. And this is for Ms. Collins. As you think back of your Furman experience, and you think about where you currently are in your career, where you live in the United States, your colleagues and how you interact with them, how do you think that your Furman education prepared you to navigate in this environment and be aware of these different biases, be aware of racism? Can you talk a little bit about how Furman prepared you to enter the professional world and navigate race, ethnicity, workplace culture?
Wow, what a question. Well, I will say that one of the things that helped me integrate as a Furman student was just the outreach that I received from even before becoming a student, from the Student League for Black Culture and the Office of Multicultural Affairs, just being involved in those student organizations, also the PUISA, and for international students. I was a very involved student, so but so having those connections really supported my vision for what I wanted in a career and how to navigate race and ethnicity, particularly biases that I knew I was going to face. When I was a student at Furman, and I think Johnna, being my classmate, both 05, can speak to this as well, there were very few students of color, very few students of Hispanic origin, as I am. And so we kind of, I don't know if naturally or also because of the support from these different organizations I mentioned, we kind of stuck together. We did a lot of things together. We attended games together, parties together. We did a lot together because we felt like we needed that support. You know, because at the time, and maybe still to this day, the majority are white students, and not only white students, but students of economic privilege as well. And as we know, you know, many students of color come from disadvantaged backgrounds economically. That was definitely the case for me. I speak personally. And so there was that intersectionality really affected me. So when I was a student there, I definitely felt like an outsider, not only because of my ethnicity and my, you know, racial identity, but also because of the lack of, you know, financial means. So certain opportunities were kind of brand new to me. Certain things that I had to navigate that I never even thought of before. And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but lots of different things like, you know, people who went to horse races and things like that, things that I just never had any experience with before. And that seemed kind of second nature to many of the students that went to Furman at the time. And so I guess the way that I think Furman prepared me largely is I credit that to Idella Glenn, who was instrumental for me when I was there. I worked in her office. I was involved a lot with the students of color there. And that really helped me feel supported and feel that these nuances and these microaggressions and all these other things, they could be, they could be navigated and they could be, you know, dealt with in constructive ways. You know, but not to say that these things were not already pre-existing in my life, because I felt those things in high school, of course, too. But going into a university setting, especially, you know, a private university like Furman, where again the majority of students have economic privilege, those were some tough things to face. And having the support of you know, faculty and staff and fellow students that were going through similar things really helped me prepare for my career and helped me shape the career I wanted, because I was undecided. And then, you know, once I got into my second and third years, it started to really mold me into what I wanted to do, which was help students that were, you know, in many ways disadvantaged economically. But, you know, as I went into sociology and then decided to get my master's in social work, it became clear that to me it was really important to be a support to other students that had similar experiences to me, you know, being students who were academically gifted but didn't necessarily have the means to go to college. So that was one of the things I focused on when I was graduating from school. And so all that kind of ties together is, you know, having that support, that outreach from Furman, which was key for me. It really helped me to navigate those, you know, I don't want to say unpleasant, although there were some unpleasant things that happened, of course, but you know, it helped me to learn how to advocate for myself, learn how to, you know, give grace to people who are not necessarily fully aware of their biases, their implicit biases, but also learn how to educate people as to, you know, who I am and what I stand for, and not just to treat me like, you know, I don't matter. And I hate to say that, but that's really what it comes down to is, you know, what we find as people of color is that we don't matter in certain environments, in certain situations, maybe all of them, if you really want to look at it that way. And so, you know, finding my voice, that was something that Furman really helped me do. And I think it was in large part due to the Student League for Black Culture, the Office of Minority Affairs, Idella Glenn herself, lots of other faculty and staff that are too many to name, but definitely.
Yeah,
Hope that answers your question.
No, it does. No, it does. You know, as you were talking, as you were speaking, it made me reflect on the importance of the liberal arts education, the importance of the Furman Advantage, and how it provides students with opportunities to not only have depth of understanding of theory in the classroom, but how to apply those theories outside of the academic environment. And you kind of, you hit on this. It's like you are a double-edged sword, in that you took what you learned from Furman and gave that experience, gave that education back to those who were, disadvantaged through, social work, being a clinician in the community. You are providing, people with the education, with the knowledge of how to navigate these important spaces that we're talking about. On the other side of that sword is that from those experiences at Furman, a student or an individual can know how to traverse those environments in which they do see things that are not necessarily normal, that may be racist, that may be biased in the workplace, and know how to identify those, discuss them in a constructive way so that they can have positive results in healing. And not to say that we should always be entering into places or spaces where we are going to be marginalized, but I think from a Furman experience, sometimes how it's a little bit easier for you to navigate those spaces where you are the only Black person, you are the only Hispanic person, you are the only type of person in the room, because you've been there, you've done it.
It's like I said on our last call, Furman has taught us all as minorities that attended the school to navigate white spaces.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Attending school to navigate white spaces. So let me move forward and ask Mr. Malamug this question. So as companies are, in this space of concern over race, concern over, ethnicity, they want to create a workplace in which the culture is healthy, where it's vibrant, where people can have exchanges with one another and not feel marginalized. What are those particular steps? What are those things that companies can do to make sure that their employees feel valued, that they're Black and brown, they're professionals of color, feel like they are a part of a healthy workplace culture?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think, when you look at what kind of steps there could be, right? The first thing that comes to mind is really having the organization take a moment to really introspect and really begin to ask the hard questions. Like, can we even address that we have a problem, right? Can we even address that we have biases and that racism exists within the organization, right? So I think that it's that whole, that saying, take a look in the mirror type of situation, where I think companies first and foremost need to just have that moment and then begin to take the necessary steps. So can we even address what the status quo is of the company, the current state of the company? Are they able to really identify what the company culture looks and feels like? Because I think once you do, then you can start to take some of those steps, like creating a zero tolerance policy on harassment and racism, being able to set up those baseline systems to help not just enable, but really empower their employees to really have conversations or address things without fear of retaliation. Mm-hmm. And I think once you start to begin to have that base, then you've acknowledged the white elephant in the room, then I think that's where you can begin to really understand where unconscious bias exists, where it comes from, learn about the negative outcomes of work, and then begin to learn how to proactively deal with it. And then I think the next step is really beginning to create engagement around ways to be able to rectify some of these issues, right? So there's a lot of research that I've come across where, you know, you can think about mandatory diversity programs versus voluntary diversity programs within an organization. A lot of the things that I've read have noted that voluntary programs essentially provide a higher ROI, and that's because voluntary programs create diversity champions essentially within the organization. You don't have to get their buy-in. They understand the wins of having a very inclusive environment. One of the things that we're doing at ScanSource is we've created a diversity advisory board, and it's employee-led, but it's also led by our Chief Diversity Officer, and it's comprised of employees in all areas of the business with efforts on recruitment, hiring, engagement, career pathing, training, and development, to be able to help out in things like career fairs that, you know, me and my recruitment team go to, and being able to go to HBCUs and really being able to have representation, as well as participation, whether it be in speaking engagements or workshops. So my team of 2 has now expanded to have some of these key players that are involved, are advocates for an inclusive environment, and can, again, help to have address some of these biases in some of these functional areas of our business. One of the things that the advisory board also does is host a monthly book club. And this is a great way to not just bring awareness on bias and racism within the workplace, but also drive discussion on some of those issues. John mentioned How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi, and that's one of the books that was being discussed, I think, this month. And then last month, we did the book club, where the book was So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. So again, being able to drive discussion to all employees within an organization, and the discussions that arise from those are all very productive conversations. They happen in a safe environment, and again, it's just another way to be able to address some of those lingering issues. One of the other things that I think from an engagement standpoint is being able to mentor, right? You know, in recruiting and in HR, you talk about, and especially when you're leading people, it's about creating bench strength within your company, right? So how do you begin to do that with underrepresented people of color, right? So there might be more formalized programs that might need to happen within the organization, but this is a great way for managers and leaders to be assigned somebody to show the ropes, sponsor them for key trainings, assignments, advocate for their career, essentially, to be able to have that voice at the table. And again, being able, a great way to boost representation for some of those underrepresented people. And then probably the last thing is that, you know, there are no short-term solutions to this, right? This is always going to be a work in progress. So it's something that's going to require ongoing effort. And organizations, I think that, you know, with the current events, you know, I'd hate to say that this is going to be the flavor of the month, but, you know, many organizations will take initial steps and then there's no follow through. So this is something that, you know, you just don't address by doing some of these things in the short term and then hope that it eradicates bias and racism within the organization. You have to remain vigilant on it, and it's going to require an ongoing effort.
No, these are ongoing conversations. You're exactly right about that. This is not something that, you know, as a one-time kind of conversation. If something occurs within a workplace, you know, you have to be aware of, are we quickly going to discuss this and then sweep it under the rug and then just move along? You know, it takes a lot of, you know, time and effort, energy to deal with a lot of these particular issues. Real quick, if each one of you could just say for the audience, I want to ask this question and then it leads into another question. How long have you been with your current organization? So if you think back of how long you've been working with your current organization, and well, how long has it been? Mr. Ferguson, how long have you been with Monumental Sports?
8 years.
Mr. Malamug, how long have you been with ScanSource?
I've been there for 4 years.
4 years. Dr. Frierson, how long have you been at Duke University?
5 years.
5 years. And Ms. Collins, how long have you been with the city of, it's the city of Charlotte, correct? Or you with Charlotte, Mecklenburg?
It's actually Mecklenburg County government, and I've been there for 3.5 years.
3.5 years, okay. All of you have you've had some longevity at your organizations. A lot of reports show that after 3 years of time is when you have people who are going to be in their jobs for, for a long period of time, maybe 5, 10, 15 years down the road. What is it like as a person of color to work within your given environment? One of the things that I am always aware of or cautious of during these conversations is that I don't want to scare students away from opportunities. We talk about race, we talk about ethnicity, racism, biases, and all of these things that have a very negative effect on people. But you all are working professionals, and you're doing great. You're moving up the corporate organizational ladder. So what is it like to work for your organizations? Why are you, still there after so many years of employment?
I guess I'll go first. So I would say, what's it like to work at Duke? So I've experienced a lot of support from my supervisor, and I've been in my current role for a little over 1.5 years, or almost 1.5 years, maybe quite a little bit close. And so my administrative role is the assistant dean for graduate and postdoctoral diversity and inclusion. So in that role, it's been very challenging in that role specifically recently, because within the School of Medicine, the constituents that I work with are really leaning on me, relying on my advice and support in a way that's very urgent and feels very acute right now. So that has been a challenge, but that's part of the nature of my specific job. But overall, as a professional, I feel like I've had opportunities to grow. I've been able to connect with leadership development opportunities and the ability to expand my skill set. When I first came to Duke, I was not a faculty member, and over time, I've been able to now say that I'm an assistant professor of the practice, and so I've been able to grow in that area as well. So I feel like I've had a lot of opportunities to grow, and especially where I am right now, I feel very valued. And very engaged, and the environment and the people around me are telling me to use my voice rather than trying to dismiss my opinions or stifle my voice. They're encouraging me to use my voice, which feels really, really good.
Others.
And Dr. Frierson, I want to say congratulations on your success. I'm familiar with the higher ed landscape. Those are major wins for you and all of the people that you represent that look like you. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I say it's been a journey at Monumental. I started at Monumental. I've been there for 8 years, which sounds crazy to me. It'll be 9 in February, but I started out as an HR manager. So I have really evolved and grown with the organization. And so I have a lot of history, I have a lot of context. And, I always think back to, as a student, you would hear people on panels similar to this and say, when you get there, use your voice, advocate, using your voice. But I think that's hard to do when you're first coming out of school, in your first couple years of being a professional, just learning how to do that in a manner that feels safe. that makes you feel protected, because not every environment is going to naturally give you that safety net or that protection. Now that I've grown, there's a time and place for everything. And so I feel like I've been able to navigate that better. And that comes with just experience. I don't think you can learn that in a textbook. I think that comes with experience and just a higher degree of emotional intelligence. But I feel obligated in that I have a responsibility to use my voice when I know something is wrong, or when I see something that is not right. And I'm not gonna lie, there's still times where I'm like, this might be a little uncomfortable. I'm looking around, I'm the only Black in the room. No one else is clearly catching up on this, but I need to say it. I need to articulate it, because there's the big difference between intent and impact. And so I feel that, part of my job is to make sure, that we create an inclusive environment for everyone, but also an inclusive environment amongst our leadership team. Because, you want to give people, you assume positive intent, but I think I would be doing myself and everyone else a disservice if I saw someone, doing something or behaving in a way that could be hurtful or impactful to another group. So I just know that I have to at least make them aware, and make sure that, we mitigate that risk appropriately. And just, so I feel compelled, over my years of experience to use my voice. And I think there's always this dual consciousness in being Black in corporate America. People always say, do you feel like you can bring your authentic self to work? And we had this conversation the other day, and it's like, well, no, I don't think anyone really brings their authentic self to the workplace, because John at Furman Homecoming is not John, an HR leader. There's the code switch, but we all do that, all backgrounds. There's different versions of ourselves that we bring to the table. But I don't ever want to be a person that perceives that I have risen above the group that I belong to. And that is where I want to make sure that I continue to use my voice. I don't want to feel as if I have assimilated into some fairy tale when I know that other people that have experienced life as I have not. So not until we've all sort of reached this place could I ever sit back and act as if, well, that's them and not me. So that is where I am at. I've enjoyed my time with Monumental Sports. And I do sometimes think, like, have I become a lifer? So I will say, keep your pulse on the job market, keep your pulse on the job market, because you have the most power in the beginning. And I'm sure Joey can talk about that. That's when you can negotiate all those things. But it's good to have a pulse on the job market also, because you can recognize your value. And sometimes when you've been in positions for a long time, that it can be reduced because you're in one system versus testing to see what other systems are offering.
Joy, Giovanna?
I think I'll go ahead and go. I, somewhat would like to echo both what Johnna and John have said, in the sense that what it's like for me. So I have the honor and, the good fortune of working in a pretty diverse workplace. I most of my career worked in very small nonprofits where I was one of the few persons of color in the room. But right now, my department is community support services, and it's a pretty large department within Mecklenburg County in Charlotte, in the Charlotte region. And so many of my colleagues and I have a lot of similar experiences that we can share. But one disparity is definitely leadership is largely persons that are white. And so the majority of my, people that are frontline staff like myself, many of us are people of color, but the majority of leadership, people in management positions and that sort are people that are minorities, are people who are not a people of color. So, it's funny, it's interesting. It's very timely. The county has made a big push to discuss equity and inclusion in the workplace for the past year. So even before the pandemic, even before the killing of George Floyd and, so many others, we've been on this, journey toward inclusion and equity within the county. And then in my particular department, there's a lot of passion and drive toward this. And especially with the division that I work for. I work for the Homeless Support Services Division. So one of our key things is looking at disparities among the homeless population and how they are served. You know, are they served in an equitable way? Are they being treated the same way by the system in terms of getting access to affordable housing? And that's a whole nother topic for another day. But obviously we know there's a huge housing disparity, and especially in large cities like Charlotte. And so I am very lucky that I have this opportunity to use my voice in a way that is not only, being pushed, it's accepted, it is becoming safer to do so, because of these, initiatives by the county and by my department itself. So I have found, like John said, in the beginning of your career, it's difficult because you don't know if it's safe. It's safety, that when you said that, I'm like, okay, let me write that down, because that's so what I felt in the beginning, is this, uncertainty. How's this going to affect my career? What is this going to do? If I have to address something, how will that affect me? And you can't help but feel that way, especially as a first starting out in a career. But as you mature and as you gain that, emotional intelligence, like you said, John, you begin to have a little bit more courage, a little bit more, bravery, and you learn how to navigate those things, and I have definitely found that one of the things that I realized early, and again, I feel like I'm echoing you, John, but is that I need to use my voice, and I need to do it in a constructive way, in a way that is, fosters inclusion, especially, and definitely equity among all of our, employees and staff. And I found myself in a unique position to do that, even as a person of color, defending my colleagues of color who happen to be Black. And I just want to give a personal story real quick. I work in a kind of precarious environment sometimes because I'm dealing with the homeless population, many of whom do not have access to health care, many of whom have, mental health situations or substance use situations that are not being treated. So there's a lot of risk of violence towards staff. And in this particular case, I had a colleague that was threatened by a client, in a workplace. And we had some issues trying to address with our department the disparity in how it's handled with other persons who are not of color versus how it was handled with her. And this really hit home for me because let's be clear, and it's very obvious that I am a white passing minority. So for me, even though I'm a person of color, I felt that responsibility to stand up for my Black colleague who wasn't getting the same treatment that I know I would have gotten despite being a person of color, identifying as a person of color, identifying as a minority. But I knew that somehow that privilege that I have, I needed to use that to defend her, and not only her, but many other of my colleagues who went through the same thing, who were not being treated equally when it came to addressing their safety concerns. So that was really powerful for me. It really felt like a lot of progress was made after that. And I do believe that things are changing in our system because, and I'm not trying to give myself any kind of, not bragging here, but I do feel that because I and some other people stepped up to the plate and said, you know what, this is wrong, we have seen some drastic changes in how safety is being handled in our department. So all that to say, what it's like to work for the county, I think it is a wonderful place to work. And I'm not just saying that because I represent them here. There is a lot of wonderful things going on. Are there still disparities? Yes. But I think what the silver lining, and I think what makes us so successful, is that a space has been created intentionally. And I think that's the key word, intentionally, to create safety towards that goal of inclusion and equity. It's being done in a very purposeful way. And I think that that's key. I don't think that we as a department could progress if we didn't have that built in, and by leadership, so that's also important, that leadership is aware and that they take responsibility and ownership of the problem and say, we're going to do something about it. And then therefore allowing the people who are on the front lines to be able to do some meaningful work. And so that's where I'm at. I really feel that I'm making an impact. I feel that the challenges are there, but they're being addressed, and we're making progress. And it's a large part to do with the fact that the county has taken steps to make it safe for everyone to do so. So yeah, that's, I guess I can stop there.
And I wanted to add something too, to connect with what Giovanna just said, and then you too, Steve. For students who are, about to enter the workplace, the reality is that there's no need to be afraid. I guess that's what's there's no need to be afraid. Unfortunately, I don't think that there's a place in our society where racism or discrimination or bias does not have some level of impact. But the difference is going into a situation, being armed with the questions to ask and the knowledge that you need in order to be successful, or to be able to discern whether a good workplace is going to be good for you or not best for you. So even though there's, I think there's great places to work, I still wouldn't say that there's any place that's, not susceptible to these things, because we're talking about human beings. And as human beings, we just have some of these tendencies. So I would encourage students just to ask questions and pay attention, keep your eyes open, and really listen, and not just listen to what's being said, but what's not being said. Really try to read between the lines and even listen between the lines to see what an organization's true commitment is to equity and inclusion.
That's very good insight. Very good insight. Joey, did you want to share sort of your insight of what it's like?
Sure. So, along those same lines, I've been with ScanSource for about 4 years, but prior to where I'm at now, I was with an organization for 17 years. And it is completely like, I was in retail management for 17 years. And so imagine my shock when I go into a corporate environment and realize very quickly that the dynamic that I ran in the previous iteration of my career is completely different than going into what I am in today. But all that to say that, I took my job very seriously as a recruiter. I essentially am the gatekeeper of our culture and who we bring into our organizations. And I definitely don't take that lightly. I don't take it lightly even up today as a manager of another person on my team. So it's one of those things where to some of the points that some of the other panelists had mentioned, there is no golden company that is, where there's not going to have some impact to bias or racism, and ScanSource is not exempt to that. I mean, that's the reason why we have an advisory board, and we're doing things that are intentional. And as long as I continue to see progress in the right direction, I feel good about where I'm at and what I'm going to continue to do. And, I always go back to, I can control the things that I can control, and what in my job can I control to be able to promote an environment that's both diverse and inclusive for everyone. So, it's definitely, it's a work in progress. I definitely still feel like I am learning on how to navigate. And I think John said it, you do have to have that code switching mentality of, who your audience is. And when I ran a store of like 30 people of, different ethnicities, ages, and backgrounds, it was a completely different environment than, where people have been set in ways since, the creation of the organization. So it's definitely being able to navigate those paths and know how to do it and know how you can impact that. I think is always going to be an important and continuing work in progress within our organization, at least.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good insight. Thank you for sharing, each one of you, sort of your own personal professional journeys and what you are experiencing in the workplace on a daily monthly or even a yearly process. I appreciate that. Now is a great time. We have an opportunity for any of our participants. If you have one or two questions that you would like to ask our panelists, either for the entire panel or for a specific panelist, please put those questions in your either chat function or in the Q&A function available here on the webinar. While we are doing that, a fun question for you all. With COVID, I'm sure each of you are working at least maybe part-time from home, sometimes in the office. It kind of depends. What's the one thing you're looking forward to in the office when you are fully back engaged 100% Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 in the work environment? What's the one thing you're looking forward to getting back to in the workplace?
I'm working 100% from home since March. And as an extrovert, I'm looking forward to when it's safe to have those interactions with my colleagues. I really miss those impromptu conversations and how ideas and brainstorming happens a lot more easily in person than at home. And I'm missing interacting with the students and postdocs that I get to work with. I'm really missing seeing them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I've pretty much been working from home. There are instances where I'll go into the office, but the majority of our workforce is still working from home. So I'm interested in getting back to, personal interactions. I mean, to her point there, it was really, you don't really know how much you do it until you don't have access to people to just hop over a cube and just, either have a, random conversation about something that you saw on TV last night, or, everything is on a Zoom or a Teams call. And while you get that interaction, it's also not the same. So even me, who's an introvert, is actually looking forward to hopefully getting back to a point in time where, those interactions and those exchanges can exist one-on-one. Because even when I go into the office now, there's really a handful of people who are in there, and it's not the same. I'm still going into an isolated area, working by myself, and then I come home, and if I'm working from home, it's the same thing. So I'm ready for, hopefully when it's safe, to get back to that, one-on-one personal interaction that I have with my colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, go ahead. Yeah,
I'll answer that too. Again, to kind of echo what my co-panelists are saying, I think the impromptu, the spontaneous interaction with colleagues and your teammates is so, it's interesting because you don't know how valuable it is until you don't have access to it anymore. So yeah, having those moments where you have a spontaneous idea just from a conversation, or that was unplanned, can be so it's so needed. I think having that connection, that connectivity, and like Joey said, we do have Zoom meetings all the time with my team, but it's just not quite the same. You just don't feel quite that same connection. But to be completely honest, what I really miss is hugs. I miss being able to give a hug to a colleague, a teammate, because our team is very tight knit, and I do miss being able to. What we do a lot of this. We see each other in the hallway, but a real hug, that's something I'm really looking forward to whenever it's safe to do so.
Yeah. And missing out on a lot of hugs as of late, for sure. What about you, John? What are you missing out on? What are you looking forward to?
You know what? I agree with everything that's already been shared. I'm an extrovert, so I'm definitely missing those just small interactions. But I'm looking forward to just the structure, because I feel like the work and home balance is definitely blurred. So I'm ready to get back to daddy's at work. daddy's at home. Because a 3-year-old and 5-year-old, it's hard for them to understand that balance. So I'm ready to get back to where I can come home and fully be home, and not this spare bedroom feel like work. I come downstairs and like, crap, am I at work? Did I just clock in? And it's like, no, it's Saturday. Relax. It's your house. It's a safe space.
Right.
So I'm definitely looking back to that, because things are starting to get blurred. I like a little more order. So I look forward to that, along with all the conversations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're right about that. The one thing I think about, and as a bigger guy, got a little bit of gut on me. I miss everybody's candy bowl. And at Furman, we're really well known for over ordering food, and then there's some leftovers here and there. None of that exists right now. So you just there's no snackage during the day like we used
Definitely.
to. So, all right. Well, I'm not seeing any questions from the audience, but that's okay. Like I said, we've recorded the session, and so we will definitely make this available to students and to faculty. One thing I want to end on is, race, ethnicity, culture. These kinds of conversations are very important to have. And as we continue through this season of COVID, of election time, of heightened awareness around racial issues, one thing that the Malone Center is definitely going to do is continue these conversations, and myself and my staff, my colleagues, we are very prepared and willing to work with students from all backgrounds, navigate into the workforce. And so, I appreciate my panelists having these conversations this evening, but to all of the students out there and even faculty and staff at Furman, the Malone Center is also a safe place to have these conversations. And so as you are looking, to find that first meaningful career, possibly transitioning to grad school, make sure that you're using us as a resource for information, so that you can make yourself better informed as you leave Furman and go off into the real world. So with that said, Dr. Frierson, Ms. Collins, Mr. Malamug, Mr. Ferguson, I almost called you Mr. Furman, Mr. Ferguson, I want to thank all 4 of you so incredibly much for your time, your talent, and your treasure this evening, providing very useful and timely information to Furman students. So thank you very much. I definitely will follow up with you in the next couple of days, just to provide this particular recording and share any insights from the session. For the people who are participated in the panelists, or for our audience members this evening, I will make each of the panelists LinkedIn information available so that you can contact them on LinkedIn. And if you do have any questions for Malone Center, it's easiest to access us on Handshake or go to our website and arrange for an advising appointment, or to schedule a virtual session so we can help you out with any of your career engagement needs. So to the audience out there in virtual land, to our panelists here this evening, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you in the future. Be safe and take care.